Zoom. My name is Angela, and I am the founder of Matriarch. Matriarch is an organization that is curated for Black women, and it serves as a wellspring for healing racial trauma by helping to lead ideas and movements that will deconstruct harmful racial narratives. I formed it out of my own experience, and mostly because of my experience in the evangelical setting. I am a church kid. Grandfather was a reverend, aunties, uncles, grandma, granddad, deacons, everybody was in church. So I grew up in church. I went to private school on and off for most of my life. Very indoctrinated very early on with the history of American Christianity, the leaders of that formation. Learned all that stuff in kindergarten, got to senior year in high school and decided I wanted to go to a secular college and blew up the church. So found myself in ministry years later. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, but I'm also a proud Black African-American female, Christian auntie, daughter, and narrative surgeon is what I like to call myself. But our context for conversation today, our crucial conversation is Black ministry leaders in white-led spaces. And I want to introduce to you our two guests tonight for the conversation that we're having on this. They have experience and they'll be able to speak to this topic. I'm going to introduce Justin first. I reached out, cold emailed the AND campaign and said, hey, I would like to speak to somebody about Black on Black crime and that narrative, and I'm getting jabs and blows about that narrative down here. And I would like to speak to someone who's working for an organization that is targeting that. And Justin responded, and as we talked, we ended up finding out we had a lot in common, but also that I felt like he had some more to add to a larger conversation. So he is a theologian, a pastor, a musician, an artist, a producer, and a husband. He resides in Chicago with his lovely wife and is a graduate of Moody Bible Institute with a bachelor's and master's degree in pastoral ministry. He is also a pastor and elder at New Community Life Church in Bridgeport, Chicago. He has been born and raised in Miami, but is and is also very proud of his Jamaican heritage. So for all you Floridians, he knows what we're going through in the summer heat, the summer months right now. Justin, you're also a visitation pastor at another church in Chicago. What's the name of that church?
That's a nonprofit ministry, Inglewood Family Outreach.
Inglewood Family.
Nonprofit, yeah.
Awesome. So welcome, Justin. And then we have Ms. Gabby. I've known her and her family actually for a while, since she was in high school. She was one of the high school students when I was leading high school ministry at my former church. She's also a graduate of Southeastern University, which is a Christian private university here in Lakeland, Florida, with a bachelor's degree in ministerial leadership. She's a daughter. Her family is really cool, by the way. She's a daughter, a sister, a wife, and an advocate, and she is passionate about empowering people and pursuing excellence in all aspects of life. She can easily be found lost in the aisles of a local bookstore or plating up something delicious. And she is no longer in Florida either. Where are you at now? Is it North Carolina?
Yes, I'm in Charlotte.
She is in Charlotte, so she is hot as well. Just our context for our conversation is there is some new momentum behind this awareness of separating American nationalism from biblical Christianity. We can see the organic parts of this nation that are anti-Black, that are anti-Asian, that are anti-ethnic, anti-immigrant, anti-Middle Eastern, anti-multilingual. People can see that current national structure is very subjugating towards everyone or anyone that is not a white hetero male, basically. And so there's this movement towards moving away from that that narrative and trying to reach and connect to something bigger, because that narrative shapes the leader structure of America. And so the same racially biased leadership structure has been interwoven into corporate America, educational institutions, government structures, and also the church in America, where white male men are viewed as the owners, the progenitors, the gatekeepers of Christianity. It's very hegemonic in structure in America. And I mean, if we're honest, they're viewed as the rightful authoritarians of the gospel message globally as well. So if you go to a Christian bookstore and look at all the authors in the bookstore and look at the faces of the pastors in the churches in America, majority Christian institutions, higher institutions, just ask yourself what image comes to mind. So that same worldview also influences how the church has been incorporated in America, which provides for a different experience if you are not part of that people group. And it's such a normative narrative that people have a hard time seeing it differently. But it's being seen for what it is, which is damaging and unauthentic to biblical Christian roots. It also perpetuates and elevates a Western worldview as Christians. So in conversations with a lot of students and a lot of Christians who are questioning church and leaving, the church setting, there's been this cultural conundrum of from Black Christians. If I have to be white American to be Christian, meaning if I have to subjugate my culture, my language, my ethnicity, either by assimilation or enslavement, why does God require that of me and not of my white brothers and sisters? So they're kind of left with a two-sided coin that says, join this other space, another space where my skin color, ancestral heritage is viewed as menial in comparison to American whiteness, when people are saying no thank you to that. Or the other side of the coin that says I'm gonna reclaim my spirituality through my heritage and my ethnicity, which is also seen as anti-Christian in America. So either way, they're left at a deficit. And so now we have this great exodus of Black people from church, from what they think is Christianity, which is really nationalism, and who are legitimately looking to separate themselves from a historically racist national narrative, but also legitimately looking to connect spiritually somewhere. And good and bad comes from that. We have, these Black cults that have arisen from that. But the good side is that some people find a deeper and truer understanding of Christianity. So we're going to talk about some of the experiences that we've had on both sides of the coin. We know there's a multitude of ethnic and cultural groups and nations present in the world and in the United States, but historically and presently, overarchingly, the racial divide has been between white Europeans and their descendants, whether Irish, German, Spaniard, and indigenous peoples and their descendants, or white Europeans and their descendants, and Africans and their descendants, i.e. me, Justin, and Gabby. So drilling down a little bit deeper, we'll be talking about living and ministering in this racial divide as Black leaders in ministry, church and outside of church ministry. And so I'm gonna start by asking Justin or Gabby, either one of you can start first. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how you landed where you are now, how you landed in the role that you are now.
Ladies first.
Well. Prior to moving to Florida, I actually grew up in New York for a little bit of time, and went to a Baptist church, but a predominantly Black Baptist church, and then moved to the South and had the complete opposite experience at a non-denominational Christian church that was predominantly white, and then now relocating to North Carolina. It's kind of still the same experience as my experience in Florida, but less so. The church that I attend now is more like 20s, 30s, rather than younger people being the minority per se. But I think that either way, during those formative years, like we moved from New York when I was 7. So I basically grew up down here. And during those formative years, like not necessarily seeing representation of people who looked like me in church structure at all, whether that's like the board or the pastoralship or people who were on the worship stage and things like that, even down to like people opening doors, was kind of like, like you kind of just ingest this narrative that there's not a space for me here, so I'm just kind of going to stay in my lane and hope that I don't step on any toes. And I think just unintentionally believing that to be true is super damaging, just because then you're less likely to present your whole self to the world for fear of that being seen as other or not acceptable or subpar. And so now that I've moved away and I'm kind of like putting down roots in Charlotte for myself instead of kind of just doing what my family is doing, I've been trying to unlearn the things that I've been taught are Christian and really just dig in for myself and find out for myself what's true, what God really says, what good intentions did people have that actually ended up being poisonous for me, that are completely separate from the truth of the gospel. So I don't know if I answered your question, but there you have it.
Yes, you did. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So there's always this deconstructing and deprogramming that happens when you find yourself in that position, that mental space. So thank you for sharing that. And what about you, Justin?
Yeah, so I grew up in church as well. My dad's still a pastor, but it was predominantly immigrant church, though it was a Black church, predominantly Jamaican, Haitian, Bahamian, but we had African American, Nigerian. But our denomination was international, so we do something called the General Assembly or visit churches. And being from South Florida, anyone who knows about Miami-Dade and Broward County, Palm Beach knows it's amazingly diverse. So I grew up going to church with all kind of people, but my own church was predominantly Black, gospel music. I'm a musician, choir roles, Hammond B3 organ. Though we would, we sing gospel. Sometimes we'd reggae-fy some of the gospel songs. And, when Donnie McClurkin tried his thing, we was kind of laughing a little bit, while probably others were like, whoa, how great that sounded. We like, oh, that was nice. But anyway, so, it was definitely a mixture. And so I really wasn't part of a white church for most of my life until probably the last maybe 10 years. And, I was visiting the church in Fort Lauderdale, and then I moved to Atlanta. That was a church with Black leadership, Blueprint Church, the Hottie Lewis. But it had like almost as much white as Black. So that was very interesting. Usually if it's a white church, you'll have a few Black people. And then if it's a Black church, you usually have no white people, or maybe one or two that maybe they're married to someone Black. But at Blueprint, it was like, whoa, this is like different. Leadership was kind of mixed. And then when I got to Chicago, Bible college and all that, it was definitely different, where I was running into a lot of white people who had some of them never even met a Black person, let alone even went to church with them. Some of them were from small town Iowa, where there's no one around except, white. So then, my heart went out even more to the Black people like you, Angela, that had grown up in nothing but white churches, where it's like, well, this is all you know. Oh my goodness, I feel sorry for you, because I've seen, both sides. So I'd say in the last like 5 to 10 years has been me being the elder, preaching, and, outside of my music's taking me to different even countries. But as far as like actually, being a part of a church, that was recent times where it's a predominantly white church, even though it has some diversity, like there's Chinese, there's South African, there's, so even then I still might be shielded from what some of you guys have experienced, where it's like just only white and then a sprinkle of, yeah. So.
And you're absolutely right. I thought everybody grew up in a church like I did. You know, my childhood experience was we were military, so we were always the only Black family in our church and in our Christian schools up until we moved to Florida. And I knew that I was not white, but I did not have the Black experience in a Christian setting outside of like my home. So my parents were it. And we didn't grow up around our relatives because of the military. So culture shock when I went to a Black church for the first time, and it was lively and fun. And also the type of church I grew up in was independent fundamental. So we're singing out of hymnals, there's no drums. There's somebody doing the 1, 2, 3, 4 beat under the podium. And, you know, a lot of legalism, a lot of other things that we can talk about. That could be a whole nother discussion. But so I was also subconsciously taught that Black leadership was, you know, not theologically sound. And so you go to Black churches for the music and, you know, the choir, but you have to have this white pastor for teaching, you know, for teaching the Bible. And that's just what shaped my faith narrative until, honestly, until about 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago when Trayvon Martin's murder happened and everybody was quiet. And so that kind of led to, leading really to my next question with you for you guys. How, because I know that you are an elder and a pastor, Justin, and Gabby, what are you doing right now in your church setting? Are you working for the church?
I'm not. So I'm currently working for like a progressive company that focuses on empowering people to go vote and actually do something, which is not. But I always have my hand in the church. I'm always doing a little something over there.
Yeah, especially going, you know, when you, I mean, I saw like the steps for you and going to a Christian university, and you know, there's just so many things I could say, but for you, Justin, with your past and your upbringing and your close tie to like your heritage, which is something that a lot of African Americans don't have. Our heritage is wrapped up in our slaves, you know, enslavement story and whatever America tells us in the classroom. How has that impacted the way you feel people view you as a leader in your current church setting?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if I don't say hey, my parents are from Jamaica, they'll, probably just, assume I'm African American or whatever. And some of that, has to deal with growing up in South Florida, kind of like a lot of parts of New York City. Like, even what it means to be Black for us is different than other parts of the country. Like coming to Chicago, I had comments like, "Oh, you Jamaican? I thought you were Black." And it's like, oh, in Miami, Black is African American, Jamaican, Haitian, Dominican. Anyone of African descent is Black. But in some parts of the country, like Chicago, it's only African American. So when it comes to being at my church, I've educated a lot of people, whether Black, white, Asian, whatever. But it kind of doesn't matter. Like they still throw me and lump me in, with any, certain maybe stereotypes or complain if I preach about racism or something. So oftentimes I'll tell my senior pastor, like, it would be better if you talk about racism because there's less they can try to say to discredit me than you, because, oh, come on, of course he cares about that, he's Black. But if the white pastor says it, I was like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, they might call him a leftist or something, but it's less that they'll call me left and they'll call me, socialist or Marxist or whatever. So, to be honest, like, yeah, that comes up every now and then, but for the most part, I know how to be just Black unified on certain issues. And then there might be something where I'm like, okay, well, I could bridge the gap with the immigrant community and with those born in the States because I'm born in the States, but I actually have family in 6 countries. So it's even beyond just Jamaica. It's like Toronto, sister in Hong Kong, cousin in Japan, London, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, so it's just trying to educate people. But yeah, mainly with the white demographic, just you know, letting them know, like getting to know people. Don't go off assumptions. And also when you bring up the theology, you know, a lot of my white brothers and sisters, I have to educate them that a lot of these institutions, conservative seminaries, did not allow Black people in till recently. So if you want to critique the theology, then critique your own camp's theology and false application that you were racist and not allowing them to come into the conservative schools. So who opened the doors for them? The liberal schools. So that's why Dr. King goes to Boston and a lot of these other guys, because those are the schools that would accept them. And then the ones who did go to the conservative schools had horrible experiences a lot of times. You know, even Dr. Tony Evans, he recently talked about being on probation at a conservative school. Not because he did anything wrong, that's just how he had to be at the school in the 70s and 80s. So there's many reasons for what some would say is inaccurate theology.
Yeah, that's true. You went to Moody, which is like the pinnacle of Bible institutes in America. Historic. I mean, I think I learned about D.L. Moody like in the 3rd grade in my Christian school. Like they were heavy on the dogma and the theology side, low on the grace and the culture side. So, and I think that, you know, what you're talking about is also, there's a regional component to it as well. It's different in Chicago than it is, you know, down here in the South. And I think just you even being able to say to your pastor, hey, you talk about race, you talk about, you know, these police shootings, is something a lot of Black leaders would never really say to their white pastors in the South for a lot of reasons, mostly for fear of like, I'm probably gonna, you know, lose my position if I push the envelope on this. And you don't want to do that, you know, down here in the South. But you mentioned to me something about an experience at Moody, because I know like the pedigree of Moody, for those who don't know how deeply respected it is as a theological institute. How was your experience there? Like, was there a lot of minority students in general? Was it diverse? Was it, you know, not only diverse in race, but diverse in like background and, you know, experiences?
Yeah, I'd say overall, I'd say no, it was not diverse, though there was some diversity there. They had a lot of decent amount of international students. I'd say Moody was probably about maybe 85% white, maybe 10% Korean. That was actually the 2nd largest population. And then, you know, maybe 7%, no, not even, yeah, 6-7% Black, but that could be African, Caribbean, and African American all together. And then maybe 2% Hispanic, and then maybe another 1% other Asian, like Indian, you know, you had some Filipinos there, you had a few, you know, Chinese, but Korean was definitely the biggest. So, you know, I love Moody, thank God for that school, but yeah, definitely has issues. But one thing that helped me, I went there older. I didn't go at 17, 18 years old. I went at 24. I already had an associate degree, and I had already, you know, kind of had my theological foundation, what I believed. But I had a good friend, shout out to a guy named Oscar Urbina. He's Nicaraguan, he's from Miami, and we knew each other on the hip hop scene. He warned me, he said, look, when you get to Moody, you're gonna be a lot of people's first Black friend. I'm like, what? There's gonna be a lot of people who have not heard of Michael Jordan or Michael Jackson. I'm like, what? Stop playing, man. The dating culture is gonna be pretty weird. And then so I went in knowing like this is gonna be the case. And then so when I faced it, it wasn't as big of a shock as others who were not warned. They had no idea of the culture of the school, and they just got smacked in the face. And some people couldn't handle it. They actually end up leaving or taking a semester off. But yeah, racially, it was actually the worst racism I ever experienced, but it was mostly racial ignorance. You know what I'm saying? It was mostly people who didn't know better and then weren't teachable. So you're telling them, nah, bro, that's not true, or you know, that's pretty ignorant, and they didn't want to like say, oh, my bad, you know, I've never heard this view, and so there's a lot of that. There were a couple incidents where you know, some swastikas ended up on the campus, but then there was one guy who said his foot made a swastika in the parking lot because there was like a rock on the ground, and he said it was like, yeah, your foot is going to create like, come on, man. You know, there were times where black students, we started rising up, and they actually made it to the newspaper. People were like ripping down posters, you know, ripping, like there was a white guy who said, hey, I realize I have white privilege, I want to talk about it. So he made posters. And this is the white guy. He said it. Like, I learned that term from white people. Like, a white woman actually invented that term. By the way, if you don't know. He tries to do an event. People are ripping down posters. You know, white privilege. They rip it down. Put American privilege posters. Like, replace them with unapproved. You know, a lot of passive aggressive stuff going on. And the dean had to address it. And you know, professors were on different sides, and it actually made it to Chicago Tribune and the Sun Times. And there was, you know, social media going on. So I think it was something that needed to be discussed and still needs to. But yeah, I think if you're a black student going to some of these type of institutions, you got to know what you're going there for. You got to know, like, man, I want to pursue ministry and honor the Lord. And this school has some great things to offer. And I'm going to have to keep my blinders on because it's going to be foolishness over here and over here. But I want to make it to, you know, the finish line. So I gotta educate. Sometimes I gotta let some things go so that I can finish and then pour into the next generation. So that was my attitude.
Yeah, and just focusing on your calling. And I'm glad you shared that because, like I said before, the pedigree of Moody is so well respected in the Christian community. That's like an automatic, like, pastoral position. If you have your degree from there, it's just shocking to hear that that activity is going on a Christian campus, and that these are going to be leaders in a church that I might be serving at, worshiping at, and working at.
Yeah,
And
real quick, I recently heard that Bob Jones University, a well-known Christian college that I think John MacArthur came out of, they just removed the ban off interracial dating in like 2003 or something crazy like that.
yeah,
They literally had a ban on interracial dating past the new millennium. And I think an Asian kid complained he couldn't date a white girl or something, and then they finally removed it. So I mean,
yeah.
it's just crazy.
It does. It goes back to that whole historical American narrative that has controlled Christianity and created this other type of Christianity in this country. So, Gabby, what about you with Southeastern? How was your experience there? Because I know it's probably a little different.
Yeah, definitely. I think my experience was a hybrid of sorts. Again, a lot of mishmashing of things in my life anyway, but I went to an extension site. So there was like a half of my interactions were digital communication with the main campus, and then occasionally going over there for events and things like that. But a lot of my experience was more so like a homeschooled version of college, if you want to call it that. That's the best way that I can phrase it, honestly. And I think that was challenging in its own sort of way, just because like my college experience was also from the church that I was attending at the time. And so the structures of families that had seniority in the church structure, that kind of also spilled over into my college experience, which was interesting because my family also had been at the church for a long time. So it's like, in terms of seniority, we're on the same level, but there were still moments where I felt like to push back against things that weren't okay. If I did it, I was like an angry Black woman, that narrative. But if someone else were to do the exact same thing, then they get a free pass. And so I kind of felt the need to walk this line between calling things out and also letting some things slide, because I'm like, if I raise heck about everything that's wrong, I'm gonna be shouting for the rest of my life. But so it's just like that. And then also at times like feeling that if I were to try to disrupt the structure and propose something that's countercultural or counter how everything has been done for a long time, that I ran the risk of standing on my own, because I also knew that if it came down to someone protecting their reputation or sticking by me, they were going to choose themselves instead of me every single time. And so that, I mean, going to college is already challenging enough because you've got a lot of stuff to do, but just balancing the social aspects of that, and knowing that even somewhere where I basically like grew up and was well known, because my family had been there for so long, that doesn't necessarily exempt me from like here's everyone else and then there's you over here in this little container.
Yeah, and that's like a dual othering, because you don't know sometimes if it's racial or if it's like because of the nepotism and the church heritage, the familial heritage that a lot of churches have. So you're like, which bucket is this, offense putting me in today? And then on top of that, if you don't have, a lot of churches call it their DNA, their culture, their church culture and their church DNA. If you don't fit that mold, really, no matter what race you are, you're also othered as well. So I definitely can relate with you on the angry Black woman. You guys, I will say, are so much better than me at letting things slide, because I did not. I was loud about everything. So I decided, I needed to make an exit for a lot of reasons, but that was not the setting that I was effective necessarily in ministering in this racial arena. It wasn't going anywhere. And like you said, Gabby, sometimes when you're in a large church or even a small church, and you're one of like 5 people of color on staff, maybe like 1 of 3 Black people on staff, it's like sometimes you don't get that support even from those people of color that you think are gonna rally along with you. And that's also damaging and traumatic. And then you're like, should I go talk to this other Black person about this issue? Because I don't really know if it's just me, or is this a race issue, or are they gonna go tell on me?
Right.
I don't know what's gonna happen. It's just very, it's very traumatic. And if you don't know who you are, you don't know who God called you to be and what God called you to do, it can wreck you. It can wreck your faith. It can wreck your whole connection to Him, if that's your only avenue or connection to Him is through your church and through your church staff. So definitely can relate to those things. What about with everything that's going on, probably, I don't know, last 7 years, with the protests and the shootings, the Black Lives Matter movements, the Black on Black crime, every church has an issue with politics. Even now with this resurgence of like spiritualism and this other, realm of spiritual consumerism with like, just a bunch of different things. People are trying to connect. Have you guys had to confront any of that individually in your positions or in your roles at your churches?
You can go ahead, Gabriella.
I think with everything kind of reaching a boiling point, even though it's been boiling forever, let's just call it what it is. But I think now that the world is on pause with the pandemic, there's like this awakening of our like white counterparts that this has been our reality for our whole lives. Like we don't get to choose when to put on or put off our Blackness. And that's a lot of people's first impression of us is our skin color before anything else. And so I think a lot of it has been like navigating this tension of like the world being so connected, but also so disjointed at the same time. And seeing on everyone's social media, like this rise of activism being popular or trendy now, and like wokeness or whatever you want to call it, of people wanting to take pictures at protests because that's the thing to do now. But the reality is there are still days where the news feed is scrolling and everyone is being trendy, and then it's like dead quiet and no one wants to talk about it. But I still am like, well, I hope that I come back today when I go run to get my groceries. And it's like, it's not funny, but at the same time, it's like, it's been like this. It's not anything new. And so when you have friends who they mean well, but they're also like, educate me about the reality that you've been living X amount of years that you've been on this earth. It's like, Ben should have had this conversation in kindergarten. Like, come on. Like, I want to help you, but also at the same time, it is so like re-triggering and re-traumatizing to unearth these like wounds to paint a picture for someone else, you know? And so a lot of it has been like having these conversations, but also trying to give people grace, but also really wanting to smack them upside the head sometimes, and being okay with like being frustrated and knowing that that's okay that I'm frustrated, because it's also my reality and this is my experience being Black in America. But not letting that tire me out from continuing to advocate for people and put in the hard work and show up time and time again, even though I'd rather literally just sit in bed and be like, yep, that's it. The world can stop now. It's fine here. So I guess that would be it. But also understanding that it's okay to not have to show up for other people and just show up for yourself. And that's okay if that's all you can give that day. And not feeling like you have to be on 100% of the time for other people to feel okay about the reality of how you're experiencing the world as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I've been blessed that at my church, I have a super humble pastor, Luke Dudenhofer. I mean, this guy, he's the most humble human being I've ever met. I mean, it's just crazy. Like, I've been at the church for 5 years. I mean, I think I half saw him get angry, like half of the time. Like, it's like not even, was he angry, man? Kind of couldn't fully tell. You know, seeing people disrespect him, so patient, and he's very teachable. And him and his wife are white. They adopted a mixed kid, black and white, a black daughter, and a Mexican and half white son. And yeah, he's super teachable. Like, even when I was visiting the church, there's like almost no black people. And he speaks about Mike Brown. He speaks about white privilege, knowing he has it from the pulpit. Like, man, like, there's like no black people here pretty much, and you're still talking about that. Like, that really impressed me. And my church is in a historically racist neighborhood called Bridgeport, where the last black person to get beat into a coma and beat into the point they had to go to the hospital was in the late 90s. So it's not that long ago. And, you know, there's, you know, Chicago is historically segregated. So anyway, I've had the blessing that my elders, my fellow elders, pastors, they get it. They're humble, teachable. Some of them live in black communities. Some of them have been putting work in the black community. So I've been blessed by that. And one good thing about Moody too, it was never just all the white people were in one box. There were some who were with CCDA, which John Perkins started, where they grew up in a black community and their parents had started a nonprofit. And, you know, I met guys who were, you know they got awakened to the plight and then became, you know, allies and advocates, and, you know what I'm saying? So it wasn't like all the white people at Moody were the same. There was a good contingent of them that fell into that white, ignorant, or racist category, but there was a good amount that were putting in good work in some of these communities. So that was a blessing when I would run into a white person who got it, or at least was teachable. But yeah, I've had to combat a lot of stuff. You know, the Hebrew Israelites are growing. You know, I'm a rapper. I have a song called White Man's Religion with a question mark, where I talk about like the Kemesh, the Moors, 5 percenters, the Hebrew Israelites. I have a conversation on my album right after a skit where me and the guy talk about some of these issues. Hey, well, we fed Christianity through slavery, things like that. And then I recently hosted a conversation where I had a guy from Zimbabwe, India, China, white people, Caribbean, Puerto Ricans, and we all said, is Christianity white man's religion? That's on YouTube, where we all for an hour just spoke. Had a Chinese guy from China, and we all said, man, what do you think when you hear that statement? So I've been doing different things, hitting the streets, just talking to people, because I've lost friends during this time. Like I went to the same middle school, high school as Trayvon. I actually performed at his church. I didn't know him, but he's from Miami. He's from where I'm from. Like I went to the same high school, same middle school. And what's crazy, I was just talking to my friend today, who's from St. Louis. So he's from pretty much the same area that Mike Brown is from. I was like, whoa, you from where Mike Brown's from? I'm from where Trayvon, and these are two of the biggest watershed moments in recent times. It rekindles stuff. I mean, like Gabby said, it's always been the case in America. And for those that don't know, like slaves, the same slave trade brought people to Jamaica, Brazil. Most slaves actually went to Brazil, not even America. A lot of people don't know that. Cuba, Dominican, like a lot of these people were enslaved as well, the black people there too. It's just that because of some of the history, those cultures maybe don't always bring it up as much because they're not currently getting oppressed as much. Like in Jamaica, there was no lynching. Like when the slavery ended, black people pretty much got to be the prime ministers and all that stuff. And so in Jamaica, most of the cops are black. You know what I'm saying? Like the black is a majority, and the prime minister is black. So I never hear my family there talk about white people because they're not dealing with, like, they could crush white people if they want. They can discriminate, which does happen with the Chinese and Indian and white out there. So, but in America, which is what we're talking about, it's people are grasping. They're like, man, F this white Christianity crap, man. I'm gonna go, Beyonce, I'm gonna go talk about my chakras and all this other stuff that she don't even know about. You know what I'm saying? And why is it, the Nigerians and the Zulu tribes, why is that what most of us, or descendants of slaves jump to, the Aruba or the Yoruba type of religion? Like, what if you was from Ghana? You know what I'm saying? What if you were from Benin City? Like, you might not be like, some of the stereotypical, like when you talked about Angela, them connecting with their spirituality, like you don't even know the exact region in West Africa you're from. Like, maybe you actually descend from East Africa, and then they brought slaves to West Africa, and then they went to the transatlantic slave trade. Like, there's a lot of nuance. So I see the hurt and the pain, people trying to grasp for that identity, but it's like, is your soul saved? Christ answers that. Let's get saved, and then maybe we can deal with some of that stuff after. But let's keep the main thing the main thing. So.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the reason behind that grasping is when you are indoctrinated and bred, educated in this country from birth, you don't see anything positive about your ancestry, your heritage. It's like you blackness started when the slaves came to this continent. That's what you're taught. And then when you get a little older, you may learn about civil rights, and then that's depressing and horrific and traumatic.
Killed all the leaders.
Right. And then you go to church, and it's like, well, that black church over there is not theologically sound, so you need to, if you really want to be a real Christian, you need to go to this church that has this type of leadership, this type of sound, this type of music, even this type of expression of connecting to God, when everybody brings their own filter to their faith, their own interpretation to their faith. But in America, it's so lopsided. Like, I mean, we just had, you're talking about prime ministers and police officers and college, university professors who are Black, and that's normative. We just had a Black president, for the first time in 200 plus year history, 8 years ago. And that was like huge. Nobody ever thought, I never thought I would see that.
Never thought I would see that.
A Black family in the White House.
Yeah.
And
when people, real quick, when people used to say, you could be whatever you want to be. I remember young being 5 or 6 years old, like, not president.
Right, like
Like, no, not anything. Maybe
and
most things, but not that.
not that. Maybe I could be, if I was a boy, maybe I could be a, you know, a pastor, a minister, but definitely Black female, nah, I'm not being president of anything in the United States. So,
And real
um,
quick, I'm sorry. Like, I gotta tell this joke. Eddie Murphy has an amazing skit about what how a press conference or an interview with the first black president would have to go, and he's like, "Hello, everybody. I'm glad you elected me." And he's
you're
like,
ducking your
"Yeah,
bullets.
he has to duck, so the sniper can't get a good shot on him." So he's like, "That's how the first black president would have to give a conversation by trying to duck the shots and address the people." So
Dodging bullets. I mean, honestly, that's a very honest, you know, interpretation of what probably happened when the White House had a Black family in it all the time. But it just goes, for me, I think the tragedy is where, you know, the church's role in perpetuating that narrative. You know, the church's role in saying, hey, yeah, you need Jesus, you need the cross, Jesus died for you, but you know, you got to look this way, speak this way, walk this way, talk this way in order to be a good Christian, in order to be a correct type of Christian. And so when these things happen where it's just history repeating itself and blows up in our face again, and you are a Black leader in this setting where the majority of people that you work with even don't understand that you may snap today because of what you saw on the news, and they're like, but we're brothers and sisters in Christ. And I'm like, there is so much history behind this that I can't stop and talk to you about in the elevator right now, because I cannot articulate what's going on in my head right now. And it's like, after a certain time, I think, you know, after having to do that for so long, I think that is one of the reasons why Black people are trying to reach back. And not just Blacks, a lot of other ethnic groups are trying to connect God to their ancestry and their heritage. So, like I said, there's a big danger in it if it's not centered on Christ. There is a big danger in it. So, as far as colorblind ideology, I wanted to bring this up because the American church is one of the only places that will preach this as like a strictly dogmatic type of Christian theology in the church. And I had a conversation with someone about colorblindness, and you know, transparency, full transparency, I think it's racist and unbiblical because I don't know how you can reconcile removing a trait or a physical representation that was imagined in God's mind to make it that person more Christian. Even if you look at trees and flowers and animals, everything is diverse. Everything is variant. God is diverse. You know, God is not this. God is an anomaly. We can't explain everything about him. And so I think he projects that through his creation. But more importantly, I think it subconsciously ties color and non-Western culturalism and ethnicity to a lesser form of the image of God. So I would hear that a lot, but I had this conversation because I told this person, I said, I think it's just also pretty hypocritical because you can ask me, you know, about my hair, where I'm from, what do Black people think about this? Or what do you think about this article? Or here's a video I want to show you about Black stuff. How, you know, where can I go to get this type of garb or, you know, this clothing line and Black, this. But as soon as I bring up the topic of racism, then it's a full stop of, well, I don't see color. And it was like, well, in these other conversations we had about culture and food and heritage, there was a lot of questions about my color and my background and my race. But now that I'm bringing this topic to the forefront, nobody wants to talk about color anymore. And I've had people tell me flat out, we should not be having this discussion in church. We should not be having this discussion as Christians. It's political, and we should not be talking about this. So just in your opinion, in regards to music and culture and teaching in the church, how do you think that colorblind theology has impacted like our expression of music in different, predominantly white-led churches, or even in Black churches, because you guys have the Black church experience that I didn't have. How has it impacted, in your opinion, those things, the teaching, the culture, and that worship experience on the weekend?
I spoke a lot, so.
I think, speaking from my more recent experience, just because like my experience of Black church was probably different than how other people experience Black church, I would say that there's kind of a mirroring of how the secular world is, where we can use elements of Blackness for fashion or for music or for all of these other things. But then when it comes to addressing issues that are affecting the Black community, then it's too much. You're asking for too much. It's too much. I don't know, like there's the fear almost of like the whole congregation collectively picking up their Bibles, turning on their heels and leaving to the parking lot. And it's kind of nuts. And I wrestled with how I felt like being on the backside of like working for the church rather than just being a congregant, you kind of witness like, okay, we're gonna have this message that's gonna be potentially polarizing, and it's typically like the message where we talk about tithing and what God thinks about that. But then that's like the edgiest sermon that we're gonna have the whole year. We're not gonna talk about racism. We're not gonna talk about police brutality. We're not gonna talk about these other things. And then if you bring it up, there's this collective like gasp or holding our breath, because how dare she ask us to do more than we're already doing. And I think that's what's kind of wild, is that we sometimes, there are aspects of the gospel that we like to forget about, or that the church, it seems like the church likes to not be like more forthcoming about, like the fact that Jesus did not have blonde hair and blue eyes and looked like what everyone likes to pretend that he looks like. And so to remove like the diversity, or to not acknowledge the diversity that existed in biblical times and now through today, wow, tongue twister, is to like limit your experience of God, because God made us in his image. So to say that you can't see God in me because I'm darker than you, like that's problematic. But people don't want to necessarily flip around and like take a look at their hearts and what they've ascribed to Christianity, or ascribed to God said this, because you think that you're not going to get fact checked or called out about it. I think it's damaging, honestly, and it's kind of nuts because it's been perpetuated for generations and generations and generations. And anytime someone ruffles feathers by bringing attention to it, the expectation is almost for them to be like forced out of the church so we can go back to having like our normal scheduling without someone stirring the pot, or however you want to call it.
Yeah. You brought up something really, really good that I think a lot of people are picking up on, and that is that you celebrate the fun parts of the Black experience, the entertaining parts of it. Not even like, some churches don't want the gospel style, R&B style, hip hop style worship even, but you know, we'll talk about, everybody wants to talk about Martin Luther King, you know, because he was a pastor, and nobody wants to talk about him, letters from Birmingham, like when he was in prison. So it's kind of like the objectification of this mythical, you've probably heard this term, mythical model minority, where you are Black, but you sound like this, you speak like this, and you assimilate this way. And so we're comfortable with having you in our setting, and we'll celebrate that part of you. But the other part of your reality, like you were saying, that's when that whole colorblind theology, I think, rears its head. And a lot of it is just history of this country, you know, and the not being able to critically think through things and separate biblical Christianity from American nationalism, because people really, and it's not even, I mean, some of it is just subconsciously engineered into you. You just are taught these things in America, that this is what Christianity looks and sounds like, proper Christianity, and this is not proper Christianity. We're going to bring our filter and our lens to it based on our nationhood and the majority of our nation, and own that. And I remember being in white churches and then moving to Florida and attending a different type of church where they just completely just dogged like Kirk Franklin, because that music is like too worldly and too cultural, and it wasn't the words, it was just the sound and the style. It was like, that's not church music. And people like Fred Hammond, and God forbid anybody wanted to do, like, rap and hip hop was not happening. And so I'm thinking for the younger generation who listens to that, and that bridge, and that is music, you know, and that could be their bridge and their tie to Christ, or to a gift that God has in them, and that's just kind of suppressed and pushed away and told that it's not proper Christianity. I don't know, Justin, I forgot you're an artist. Can you speak a little to that? Like, what has your experience been with, you know, interweaving hip hop into Christianity?
Yeah, well, so I grew up on Christian hip hop. So for me, I was saved as a child. So a lot of people get saved and then they discover, oh, that's the thing, Christian hip hop. So that was never my journey. So, I saw people making a living off Christian rap all my life. So always knew there's a pretty big industry, if you just know how to maneuver right. But yeah, I've had to, deal with a lot of ignorance within even the Black church and white. Like, I always have to tell people, oh yeah, I'll get you a CD for my granddaughter. And I'm like, well, you do know hip hop started in the like early to mid '70s, right? So people like Run DMC are grandparents. Like, they're older than you, lady, who's in your 50s. There's rappers, in their 60s and 70s now. Say Africa Bambaataa and KRS-One, and you got, even Jay-Z, 50 years old, Nas, 40s, 50s, Eminem, 50, 40s. So it's Snoop Dogg's a grandfather. So, just having to kind of educate even Black people about hip hop, and then, certain white people who think it's just for young white people, or it was created by Black people, but it's not just Black music. It's the number one selling genre in the world, not just in America. So, and then, I say there's no music anyone's doing right now, even hymns, that are exactly what was going on in the scriptures. You know what I'm saying? So all of us have went through some type of innovation. You're using a microphone, innovation, using a projector screen. David ain't have no projector screen in Israel, where he's, playing his instruments, and Paul, when he was writing, and, they weren't singing in English, you know what I'm saying? So it's like all of us have to innovate in some sense. So there's no pre-approved genre that God necessarily favors or discredits. It's more about the person doing it. And I believe, the lyrics definitely matter. But so, and back to the colorblind thing, I think A lot of people who have that view, they mean well, you know. They want to say, I want to look at you and judge you by the content of your character, not by your skin color. But the problem is, have you ever spoke to a person of color if that's helpful? Because it's not. You're saying I'm colorblind. Like, when you have views that you want to be a bridge to the minority community, you should actually talk to the minorities. Hey, how can I be a bridge instead of assuming? Because like Gabby said, God created us this way. Revelation chapter 7, 9 talks about every nation, tribe, and tongue being in heaven. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, John could see our distinctions, you know, when he saw that vision. So, yeah, we got to, you know, and I love what Trevor Noah says. Not that I endorse everything Trevor Noah says, but he's pretty funny. He says, someone says they're colorblind, what do you do at a traffic light? You know, stop. Going, can't see color, right? You know.
It's true, and the Bible it speaks to me so directly to the importance of heritage, lineage. I mean, God took time to write out so and so begot so and so, and they begot so and so, and they begot this nation, and they lived in this nation. And I think again, it's the historical position of race in this country that damages our identity, you know, and our God-given identity. So that actually helps me, brings me to my last question for you guys. With that and those things in mind, what are your hopes moving forward for Christianity in this racial space? Like, for example, what methods do you think need to just die? Like, we just need to die. They need to die and we need to bury them. They just don't ever need to come back. And what do you think needs to be birthed or resurrected in our approach to attack this very, very heavy spiritual force of racism, discrimination, bigotry in our country?
Yeah, I know. Well, my church, they did something called a repentance walk, which was amazing. And they repented for the racism of their neighborhood and that area what it was known for. And so I would encourage like a lot of white churches that even if you're like, well, I'm not around black people, or you know, I'm in small town wherever, and we ain't had nothing to do with X, Y, and Z, still benefit from it. And if you repent, it's like I'm repenting on behalf of people who look like me, who have done certain things. Just like me as a young black man, I have to speak to certain things that are going on in my community, though I'm not perpetrating them. I'm not shooting nobody. I'm not gang banging, but I work with gang members in Chicago, and I can't ignore the elephant in the room that there's an issue. Now we can get into why. You know, I definitely believe systemic racism plays a role. I do think there's personal responsibility, but the conditions people are born in will play a role with their choices and what's available to them. So I would say, yeah, churches do repentance walks, man. Like, and we repent, man. Man, we walk and we repent. We say the white church has failed for so long on this issue, and we want to repent and say, man, we want to move in a different direction now from what we have done. Even if you feel you haven't personally done it, all right, you know it's happened. So on behalf of those who have failed, most of the KKK were white evangelicals, Protestants, not Catholics, not Buddhists, not Mormons, no, right? Protestants, you know, a lot of these police officers and the unions, and you know, and many police do their job, praise God. Many police are doing the right thing, but there are a lot that are not. And so we got to call them out. So church is not being afraid. But I think that repentance was something practical that a lot of churches could organize. And, you know, it's not even a protest. It's actually just saying, we are sorry, repent, and we want to publicly show people that.
I think that's good.
Sorry. I think piggybacking off of what you said, Justin, about like the actionable items, I think a big part of that is a push for people to not be afraid to have those crucial conversations of calling out the things in the church that we've accepted as law that aren't necessarily like biblical, but just have been blindly accepted. And honestly, being willing to risk your position or whatever status that you've accumulated for the sake of wanting the church to really get back to what it's all about, which is Jesus, like the personhood of God. And so honestly, I just think that people need to be willing to be uncomfortable and exist in that space and not necessarily know when that's going to be resolved, if that means that growth is going to happen in the minutia of wading through this tension and the heaviness. Because the truth of the matter is, like, racial tension and racism and white nationalism and all of it is heavy stuff. This isn't things that you just bring up over breakfast conversation. And that it's okay that it's heavy, and that there's not necessarily, it's less that Black people are expecting an apology and more so that we just want it to stop and to move forward with something new instead of continuing these cycles of trauma, and knowing that it takes hard work, but if everyone's willing to do their part and like band together, that it can happen. And that it's not just Black people's fight, it's all of our fight. Because you either decide to be a part of the solution or you decide to continue to perpetuate these cycles. And either way you're choosing. So you might as well get with it, get on the right side, you know what I'm saying? So really just honestly to have the uncomfortable conversations, call out the person that you might be uncomfortable having that conversation, but knowing that it's for the best. And even if it costs you something, it costs everyone something. And that's just part of it. Like, you're not going to escape unscathed. Like, everyone's going to have to lose something, whether that's your worldview and lies that you believed, or your position or your status or your comfort.
Yeah, definitely. Because people are losing stuff anyway. They're losing their lives, and the church is losing, people. And I think to go along with what you guys said, a big thing I think needs to die is this siphoning off of these Black-led social movements, just to turn around and say, look what I know this information now, so I'm going to post it on Instagram so you know that I follow this Black-led, social movement or this speaker, and without advocating for biblical equity all around in church staff space. And if that means just calling out the things that are not true and reckoning with that, and holding your leadership accountable for non-biblical representation and interpretations of this faith. And like you said, they're gonna have to kill their worldview sometimes. It is so interwoven into your nationalism and your citizenry in this country that it feels like you're teaching them another religion when you say, that's not Christian, that's not biblical, has no biblical foundation. That's just an American theme that's been planted here and used to justify this type of abuse or this type of teaching. So I think what happens when these explosive things happen in our culture is people run to all the Black influencers on social media and all the Black Tony Evans and T.D. Jakes, all the Black leaders in the church, and just sit there and listen and siphon off of them just to keep that knowledge. But they're not out holding their pastor responsible to do repentance walks or saying, hey. And so that I think just needs to stop, where people are just, I heard, I feel sorry, I feel bad, here's what I learned, and then they move on. They don't advocate, they don't hold that leadership accountable. I also think what needs to be resurrected is just letting, or brought to life, is letting Black people heal. I think we run to this too, and we just want to help and we want to educate because we want it to stop. We just don't want it to continue. But we do not allow our own selves the privilege of healing. and just stopping and reconciling with our pain and taking time away and letting that sit with us and sit with God and just grieve. You know, we don't give ourselves time to grieve. We're just bombarded with questions, and we're bombarded with, hey, can you come talk about this? What do you think about this? And how are you? And which is all well-meaning in a lot of cases, very well-meaning, but we don't get a chance to heal. You know, it's very damaging to see these images on social media, and we haven't been given a break this year. Like before, it was like a couple years apart. You know, you kind of take a breath and go back. But now it's like every single month. On top of that, the pandemic and the election and everything else that's going on, and we're reckoning with our history over and over and over and over and over again, especially African American. It just keeps getting brought back up. So this year, and I know God is sending a larger message to us through that, but you know, it's exhausting to hear everything we say getting triaged through white thought and filtered through white thought so that it can be palatable to people. So sometimes you just need to heal, and that's not always pretty. You know, you just need to grieve and give yourself permission to grieve. I think my posture moving forward for all of this is John 10:16, where he's talking about being a shepherd, and he's talking about, hey, when the wolves come, you know, the bad shepherd runs because he was just here for the money, and he leaves all the sheep, leaves them all open to the attack. But I'm the good shepherd. And a lot of people stop there, and they don't read verse 16 that says, also, don't you know I have sheep that are not from this pasture, that are not from this flock, that I need to go and speak to. And then when they hear my voice, they'll come too. And then we'll all be one flock. And it's the most, it's like the verse that to me is the most ethnic, multicultural ethnic verse in the Bible. Because he's like, y'all are in this flock. I got y'all. I'm watching you. I'm your good shepherd. But there's another flock that's not of this flock. And when they hear my voice, we'll all be one. And I think he was speaking, you know, specifically to Jews about there's some more people that are not, you know, that are not Jewish that are going to be coming into this fold. But he doesn't say all of you all are going to be the exact same sheep. He said you're going to be the same flock. And so every flock has individual sheep. You know, they all have different personalities. They all have different behaviors. And I think Jesus was making a really good point to say that. And so until we see that, and I think until, as far as America is concerned, until America stops being what I call Cain to Abel and thinking that their American sacrifice, American version of Christianity, deserves more attention, is a better sacrifice, is a better offering than every other country, every other ethnic group, we can't move forward. You know, we're always going to have this deficit of fixing where we think we are better than everybody else. And, you know, to Black people who have been traumatized and who have been in these settings and who have been hurt, we have to stop making this about people feeling comfortable and about people accepting us and about pushing back our God-given, our God-created, you know, physical visage and our ethnicity and our heritage and our culture and our food just to make people feel comfortable. I get a lot of pushback from Black evangelicals. I've gotten a lot of blows from Black evangelicals on this discussion of racism because it's super uncomfortable. Nobody wants to talk about it and nobody wants to keep talking about it. And it makes our white counterparts uncomfortable. And that's where, you know, we go and attend church, and that's where we tithe or we worship, and nobody wants to have that feeling of division. But what we're doing right now is not working. And so
interesting you bring that up too. In my circles, it's been the opposite. It hasn't been a lot of Black Christians saying, oh, we need to stop because making white people uncomfortable. It's been like I call overwoke crowd, where it's like, yo, they looting and rioting. Well, you can't say nothing because you can't tell people how to grieve. And I'm like, wait a minute. We're still Christian more than we are Black. Like, sin is still needs to be called out. You know what I'm saying? Like, it can't get to a point where, well, you're grieving, do anything. Oh, you know, because if you own one of them businesses, you would not be saying that. You know what I'm saying? Because you don't own the business, like, oh yeah, man, wreck it up. And people are like, well, I'm not condoning it. Well, you are. If you're saying it's okay, you know, and I get it. I'm grieving as well. But as I'm grieving, I can't go and then shoot somebody, you know. Like, people are actually breaking into homes, like in certain parts of the country, doing some of that stuff. And I'm like, yo, like, we have to still say at the end of the day, like, we are believers, and, you know, a soft answer turns away wrath. You know what I'm saying? So I try to be gracious but firm, like you said. Like, I'm not no punk. You're not finna just do whatever. I'm gonna hold you accountable, but, you know, I don't have to be a jerk with it either. But when I have seen some of my people, they going crazy. Like, they're believers. They cuss on the internet, doing all that. And now I won't grieve that way. I won't do it that way. But I'm like, man, I understand why you're at that point. I haven't got to that point, and we must use self-control, but it's ugly out there, and I can see why people are grieving the way they are. But you talked about ending some things. I think we should end, us as believers, advocating for any blue or red, Democrat, Republican. Vote for who you want to vote for, but I believe we should more be about preaching the gospel and talking about these issues, and less about, well, the Republicans got it right, oh, the Democrats got it right. No, they both have sinful issues, you know what I'm saying? And I just saw a quote from Ice Cube recently. I don't know how long ago he said it, and once again, not that I endorse everything Ice Cube says, but I think he got it right on this one. He said, left wing and right wing are both a part of the same bird, and I don't want to be part of that bird. And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Left wing and right wing, you know, because, you know, left wing liberal, right wing conservatives. Like, I don't really want to be part of that bird. And if you're a biblical Christian, how could you really say this? I'm gonna fight for this one party, like, because to me, both have their issues, and I think you got the Democrats fighting for social justice and minority to do a better job with that, helping the poor, but then they, you know, very liberal, they let anything go. There's no real biblical standard on marriage and homosexuality, things like that. But then, you know, the Republicans, the right wing, like, yeah, in some ways they stand for biblical values, like God bless America. You want to, you know, be explicit about Christian faith in some ways, but then they're ignoring the poor. They're empowering the racism to continue. They're, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I don't, you know, that's why I'm part of the AND campaign, where it's like both and, like, you know, what can we do to say we care about social justice and biblical truth, you know, sound doctrine. So that'd be something I think should end. Like, there's no one political party that just has it right biblically. Like, both have some good points, I would say. So.
Yeah, I agree. I'm independent. I don't subscribe to one political party for that purpose. And that can be very abusive both ways, to just use that to bash. I've been bashed over the head and told I had to be a Republican because I'm a Christian, or a Democrat because I'm Black. So it goes both ways. And you see it now because it's an election year, and it's like in everybody's face. But the evangelical crowd has really, really taken it. Well, maybe that's not factual. What we're hearing is that the evangelicals have really sided with one party. And it's just, that's a whole nother conversation, the whole politics side of it. But I do agree that if you're a Christian, you have one king, that's Jesus, and you need to do some critical thinking and not just side with a party just because somebody told you to side with the party, because nobody's gonna give you everything, anything that aligns with Jesus and the Bible completely. Everybody has to make a compromise there. So just critical thinking, I think, is missing a lot in our Christian circles, and the ability to have these conversations and to critically think to them and apply theology to them without just, blah, blah, blah. Well, no, my pastor so-and-so said. So that's why I like the AND campaign too, because I like their narrative of both and that's just how it is. You know, America's very binary, this or that, you know, Black or white. So I do like the both and I do agree that if you're cleaning up social justice issues, but as a Christian and you're not leading people to Christ, you're just cleaning up their social issues. I think KB said this, on their way to, you know, like a spiritual destruction. So they'll be woke, but where are they going to end up spiritually? And so you can't have it that way. You can't have it all, you know, dogmatic and come to church and sing and worship God, but don't insert yourself into the wrong and injustices that are going on in the world. So it is very much a both and answer, and you have to keep having these conversations. I know everybody's tired of hearing that. Have conversations, talk, but we have to, because we have not had them, and this is happening. And so what are we going to do next? So definitely continuing these types of discourse and these types of just thinking through things, I think is helpful. But I also think, you know, respecting Christian leaders, you know, invalidating somebody's calling on their life, whether they are Black, female, Asian, you know, Latino, or white, needs to happen in this country, because that's not what's historically what has happened, and that's not what's happening now. And the reason for this call for me was to talk about the pain that I feel to see a specific group of people walking away because of cultural, racial issues that could be addressed by the church. And now we have social expressions and social movements doing what the church could be doing in the world. So with that, I wanted to ask you guys what you're working on as far as like projects, and how can we find you on social media? What's going on in your world as we wrap this up? Nothing?
I think for me, it's a lot of continuing to gather resources that are true and not necessarily filtered through someone's biases. And then also like continuing to fill the world with art that showcases the beauty and diversity, whether that's like through writing. Recently I'm on a painting kick, which is fun. And so just like, because I remember growing up and just wanting to see someone who looked like me, and I still think part of me exists looking for more people who look like me. And so rather than just being a consumer of those things that exist, adding to the solution, and then surrounding myself with more people who are doing the work and people that I can support their efforts and work to become more of a unified front rather than where you're either on this side or you're on that side and we're just going to yell at each other across the street, because the world doesn't need more yelling across the street right now. And if I just yell, then I'm not actually doing action stuff. So really just trying to get down to the nitty gritty, evaluate, and constantly recalibrate what I believe to be true, but also putting out things into the world that are resources that can be utilized, added to other people's tool belts. So we're not at a deficit for that.
Yeah, definitely needed. That's awesome. I love that, because we need tools to survive. If you are Black leader in a predominantly white-led space, especially in the southern region of the United States, it's a whole different ballgame. And we're just not there yet. So having that tools to survive, so you can, you know, live out your calling, basically, is good. So thank you, Gabby. And we can find you on Instagram. I think I'll have your social media, but I'll just repost that Instagram for you and when I go back and edit our video. What about you, Justin? What are you working on?
Yeah. So I recently started my own record label, but I do have a new album. Yes, I have physical copies right there. So called NNSM, new name, same missions. My fourth rap album. So I have, you know, all kind of topics on there: racism, you know, theology, you know, history, all kind of things. I have skits on there just talking about different things. You know, I'm writing a lot, theological articles, things on my website, hosting conversations, sermons, you know, some activism. COVID has slowed certain things down in that area, but yeah, putting a lot of this teaching in my art and music, and like I said, writing, and yeah, we're always working on things, yeah, sermons, as I said, and yeah, I just had the white man's religion conversation. Is it a white man's religion? All those different races, and I submitted it to Gospel Coalition. I'm gonna send it to a couple different outlets,
Yeah.
like Witness and Jude 3 Project. And there's already some good organizations doing
Yeah.
some good stuff on the issue of race and everything. And it's interesting you keep bringing up the South, Angela. And it's like in many ways, man, I don't know, the Midwest might be worse, man, with race. You know, I'm from the South. And I'm like, I'm experiencing stuff right now that, like, especially the segregation, man. Like, because I feel like in the South, yeah, there's some open racism and all that, but it's kind of like you know what you're getting sometimes. But it's like in the Midwest, people are segregated, and then so you don't even know about their culture, and y'all not even interacting much, and then it's like, oh, that part of town over there, and then, you know, so I'm like, man,
I
like,
think
yeah,
with it's in church and out of church. I think the South takes that into church and out of church. And I think the Midwest, like you said, it's very compartmentalized. And so you don't notice it. And I think you, honestly, I think you were just blessed to be at the church that you're at.
no, I'm saying, like, it's bad out here too. You know what I'm saying? I
Oh,
feel
no,
like,
yeah, I know
yeah.
that.
So
Chicago is always, Chicago
it's
is always in the news.
just, yeah, like a lot of black people don't even see white people outside of like a, you know, doctor or some other, you know, and in the South, I didn't hear about that as much, you know, and you know, there's different issues, you know, it's bad everywhere. I agree with that. But I'm like, certain things I'm seeing out here, I'm like, man.
Yeah. I think too, because you were in Miami. Miami is a little country.
Yeah, you're right.
It's very diverse.
Yeah, it's not like Pensacola or Tampa or Lakeland or Tallahassee or Gainesville.
Yeah, places
Plant City.
We still don't go.
Yeah, my dad had property in Plant City, Florida, boy. I'm like, man, Dad, we need to get to the hotel or where we're staying by sundown, cause
exactly.
That.
Yeah, I think Miami is a whole different. It's super diverse. It's a microcosm of you know, the world basically, in the Caribbean and the United States. Just like New York City is totally different than Tampa, but I think for me, it's I took time over the last couple of years to just really figure out my Christianity, not my Christianity, but Christianity, deprogram things that I was taught, look for Black-led churches. I haven't found one in Tampa that's really good, theologically sound, but remove myself from the space because it was being conflated with working in that space and then attending that space, and I was not in a healthy place. And you know, God used a lot of things to remove me from that space, especially growing up a Christian. When you have this crisis of faith and you're like, you know, I've been a Christian since I was 5. What in the world? Why am I not wanting to connect with God in it? What's this barrier? So the barrier for me was a lot of the attitudes and conversations and reactions to of my church community to the things that were going on in the world that were impacting me. And it was like, I can't even have this conversation. Yeah, I can't thrive here. I can't continue this anymore. And so it was a hard decision because you feel like you're dropping out. You feel like you're leaving Christianity when I was really just leaving this certain type or expression of it. And God has really brought me around through the struggle and trauma of figuring out what happened, you know, with me, but also what happened with Black people in the United States. And that's where he has me tied to that right now. And so I had some resources for people to read. One is a really, 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 really super just insightful book called Beyond Colorblind by Sarah Shin. And man, she is InterVarsity Press. She hits everything on the nail as far as culture, ethnicity, how God redeems that, how God uses that as a vehicle, where we are behind in this country on it. And, you know, she really digs deep, and I'm going to be doing a group study on this on my website. And then the other one that I just discovered a few months ago, which is also a really good book that I've shared with a lot of people, it's called A Multitude of Peoples by Dr. Vince Bantu. And it's, you know, about Christianity being a global religion, but also he goes into Egypt, Nubia, the parts of Africa where it was indigenous before the slave trade, because you hear that a lot. I heard that growing up a lot. Christianity saves Africans, you know, on the slave ship. And so he
Vince is a good brother, man.
yeah, this such a good book for insight. Another one is called Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. If you want to have you know, more of a historical detailed report from slavery through Reconstruction through civil rights, and how, like you were saying, some Blacks are not allowed into these institutions because of these legalized, you know, discrimination, and how that has impacted the church. Very, very good book. Another good book, a lot of people are surprised I recommend, but it's an excellent book. It's called History of White People. A lot of white people don't understand they have an ethnic background in history, and that racism started with white people discriminating against other types of white people. You know, if you had dark hair, darker olive tone skin, and you're from Turkey, you were considered Black and you were discriminated against. And so it started there, and then it shifted over into America when everybody who was from Europe banded together, and then the slave trade started. So History of White People is a good book. But I'm doing these conversations, I'm growing and healing, and thank you all so much. And I really appreciate y'all staying late with me on a Friday night. And let's stay connected, and I'll show people how they can connect with you and what you guys are doing. Maybe if you go to Chicago one day, we'll visit your church up there. And Gabby, I'm up in Charlotte. I've been to Charlotte a couple times, but I think I know where you're worshiping, and so I love that church, and I may be there up there soon.
I love Charlotte. I've been there a bunch of times. Pineville.
Nice place.
Yeah, it's like, I used to live in Atlanta. Like, Charlotte's like what Atlanta used to be before it got overcrowded. Like, a lot of new houses and like affordable real estate in certain areas. And then like I saw the hood and I was like, that's a project right there? What?
Right.
Really? You know, one of my heroes is from Charlotte, John P. Key, great gospel artist.
And I loved that I loved that some of our experience did not match. You know, a lot of people think that every Black person goes through the same thing and experiences it the same way. So I love that some of the negatives that Gabby and I brought, that you actually had a positive experience in that same arena, Justin. So it's just the reality of our lives. And you know, the saying Blackness is not a monolith, and neither is our experiences. But we need to hear these things so we can stop placing everything in, you know, left or right. Like you.
And now another thing, so we're gonna stop and stuff, is like knowing that if I have an experience, but still being aware of the predominant Black experience. So I can be like, yo, I've never had a cop really mess with me until like this year, last year, it started happening. But for the most part, growing up, maybe one time growing up, I did have a cop experience. But then I know the predominant and typical experience of a Black man is not that. I can speak to that. I can say, yeah, for me, it wasn't necessarily X, Y, and Z, but there's still a problem. There's still, that's the norm is still this, even though, right. And I think sometimes people are like, well, that didn't happen to me, though. It's not a problem. No, you still have to be aware of what's going on, even if you personally weren't as affected by it as somebody else. It's like, you never been in a gang, so gangs don't exist now. Like,
right.
Like, you never, like, that'd be stupid. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I love that. That's critical thinking. You know, it's a skill we need to build again in our country. We're